The ancient leather seats of Harvard's Emerson Hall creaked like old bones as Maya Washington shifted uncomfortably in the back row, her small frame nearly swallowed by the towering amphitheater designed for college students twice her age. At 12 years old, she was a sparrow among hawks, her dark eyes darting nervously around the imposing lecture hall where portraits of long-dead economists gazed down with stern disapproval. Her feet barely touched the floor, encased in scuffed Nike sneakers that belonged to her 15-year-old cousin Jerome. Size 8 shoes on size 5 feet meant she had to curl her toes to keep them from sliding off, but they were better than the worn-through flats she'd outgrown 3 months ago. The laces were knotted where they'd broken, and she'd carefully colored over a permanent stain with a black Sharpie marker the night before. Maya pulled her grandmother's oversized cardigan tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the lingering scent of Dove's soap and the industrial cleaner Grandma Rose used at her night job. The sweater had seen better decades, its forest green wool now pilled and stretched, but it was warm and it smelled like home. Like safety. Two things that felt increasingly rare these days. Around her, Harvard undergraduates and graduate students chatted easily about spring break plans in the Hamptons and internships at Goldman Sachs. Their voices carried the casual confidence that came with trust funds and family connections, while Maya clutched her second-hand notebook, pages carefully torn from a composition book she'd found in the university library's lost and found. Professor Martinez droned on about supply chain economics, his monotone voice mixing with the late afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows to create the perfect recipe for drowsiness. Maya fought to keep her eyes open, but exhaustion weighed on her like a lead blanket. She'd been up until 3 in the morning helping Grandma Rose clean offices downtown, pushing a vacuum cleaner nearly as tall as herself while Rose scrubbed bathrooms and emptied trash cans. The $15.50 an hour Rose earned wasn't enough to cover rent, groceries, and Maya's program fees, especially not since the scholarship had vanished like smoke 3 months ago. The letter had been clinical, corporate, due to budgetary constraints. Your full scholarship has been terminated effective immediately. No explanation. No appeal process. Just a $50,000 debt that hung over their heads like a storm cloud, growing larger with each passing month. Maya's eyelids grew heavy as the professor's voice faded to white noise. Her chin dipped toward her chest, and for a moment, she allowed herself to drift. In her dreams, her father was still alive, still tucking her into bed with stories about how smart girls could change the world. In her dreams, they lived in their old house with the yellow kitchen and the garden where Mama used to grow tomatoes. In her dreams, money wasn't a constant, gnawing worry that kept Grandma Rose awake at night, calculating and recalculating bills on the back of envelope scraps. A sharp elbow to her ribs jolted her awake. The graduate student beside her, a pale, sharp-featured young man who'd complained loudly about having a child in his advanced economics course, smirked as he gestured toward the front of the room. "Looks like you're about to get some excitement, kid," he whispered, not bothering to hide his amusement. Maya's heart lurched as she saw the commotion at the front of the lecture hall. Professor Martinez was shaking hands with a man who commanded attention like a gravitational force. Even seated in the back row, Maya could feel the shift in the room's energy, the way conversations died and heads turned as if drawn by invisible strings. Richard Blackstone. Maya had seen his face on magazine covers and grocery store checkout lines, always photographed in $1,000 suits with that cold, calculating smile that never quite reached his steel-gray eyes. At 52, he moved with the predatory grace of someone who'd built an empire by crushing anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a frame kept trim by expensive personal trainers. But it was his eyes that made Maya's blood run cold. They swept across the lecture hall with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens, cataloging weaknesses and advantages with ruthless efficiency. When his gaze passed over her section, she instinctively slumped lower in her seat, pulling the oversized cardigan up to her chin like armor. "Students," Professor Martinez announced, his voice carrying new energy, "we have the extraordinary honor of hosting Mr. Richard Blackstone, CEO and founder of Blackstone Industries. As you know, Mr. Blackstone's innovative approaches to market dynamics have revolutionized multiple sectors of the global economy." Polite applause rippled through the hall, though Maya noticed some of the older graduate students exchanged meaningful glances. She'd done enough research to know that Richard Blackstone's innovations often involved buying struggling companies, stripping them for parts, and leaving thousands of workers unemployed. The business journals called him a visionary. The families whose lives he'd destroyed probably had other names for him. Blackstone stepped to the podium with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. His voice, when he spoke, was silk wrapped around steel, smooth, cultured, and absolutely merciless. Thank you, Professor Martinez. I'm delighted to speak with Harvard's brightest minds about the realities of economic power in the 21st century. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Today, I want to discuss something most of your textbooks won't teach you, the art of strategic market manipulation. Maya's pen froze over her notebook. Strategic market manipulation. The phrase sent ice through her veins, though she couldn't quite understand why. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory stirred, her father's voice, urgent and frightened, talking on the phone late at night when he thought she was asleep. Market manipulation, you see, is like a chess game played on a global scale, Blackstone continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. The key is to understand that every market, every economy, every financial system has pressure points. Weaknesses that can be exploited by those intelligent enough to recognize them and ruthless enough to act. He clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint slide appeared showing a complex web of corporate structures, shell companies, and financial flows. Maya squinted at the tiny text from her position in the back row, her exceptional memory automatically cataloging the patterns she could make out. Consider this example, Blackstone said, laser pointer dancing across the screen. A mid-sized manufacturing company with strong fundamentals but cash flow problems. Traditional economics would suggest supporting such a company through temporary difficulties. But strategic thinking reveals a different approach. Maya's stomach began to churn. The diagram looked familiar in a way that made her skin crawl, though she couldn't place why. First, you identify the company's vulnerabilities, suppliers who can be pressured, key contracts that can be challenged, perhaps a few strategic lawsuits to drain their legal budget. Then you wait. Patience is crucial. As their position weakens, you offer up a rescue, a buyout at a fraction of the company's true value. The owners, desperate and exhausted, accept. You acquire a valuable asset for pennies on the dollar. Several students were taking notes furiously. Others looked uncomfortable with the casual way Blackstone described what sounded suspiciously like corporate warfare. But what about the employees? Asked a young woman in the third row. The families who depend on those jobs. Blackstone's smile didn't waver. Economics, my dear, is not a charity. Sentiment has no place in strategic decision-making. The weak are consumed by the strong. That's not cruelty, that's evolution. Maya felt sick. The room seemed to tilt around her as pieces of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously assembling for 5 years suddenly clicked into place. Her father had worked for a mid-sized manufacturing company. He'd come home stressed and worried, talking about cash flow problems and mysterious lawsuits. And then he died. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The oversized cardigan felt suffocating now, and she pushed the sleeves up her thin arms, trying to get air. Around her, the lecture continued, but the words seemed to come from very far away. Of course, sometimes you encounter resistance, Blackstone was saying, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. Employees who won't accept the inevitable. Middle management who think they can fight the tide. Even the occasional executive who develops an unfortunate conscience. Maya's vision blurred. She gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles white against the dark wood. Such people must be dealt with decisively. Termination, legal pressure, sometimes more, permanent solutions become necessary. The room fell completely silent. Even Professor Martinez looked uncomfortable now, shifting nervously behind his podium. It was then that Blackstone's cold gray eyes found Maya in the back row. His gaze lingered on her small form, taking in the oversized sweater, the too big shoes, the notebook with its carefully torn pages. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or calculation. You, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Young lady in the back row. The one who's been sleeping through my lecture. 200 faces turned toward Maya. She felt heat flood her cheeks as conversation stopped mid-sentence and every eye in the room focused on her small, shrinking form. Stand up, Blackstone commanded, his voice deceptively gentle. Maya's legs trembled as she rose from her seat. She barely cleared the heads of the students in front of her, a tiny figure drowning in borrowed clothes and terror. What's your name, child? Maya, she whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again. Maya Washington. Maya Washington. He rolled the name around in his mouth like he was tasting it. And what brings such a young student to Harvard's advanced economics program? The way he said young made it sound like a disease. I qualified for the gifted program, Maya managed, her voice barely audible. Did you indeed? Blackstone's smile was razor sharp. How fascinating. Tell me, Maya Washington, what did you think of my lecture on strategic market manipulation? Maya's mouth went dry. 200 students waited for her to humiliate herself, to prove she didn't belong among Harvard's elite. She could feel their amusement, their anticipation of watching her fail. But then she thought of Grandma Rose, working until her arthritis-swollen hands could barely hold a mop. She thought of the $50,000 debt that hung over them like a sword. She thought of her father, and the manufacturing company that had mysteriously failed just before his death. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than she felt. I think, Maya said carefully, that what you described isn't market manipulation. It's economic terrorism. Gasps echoed through the hall. Professor Martinez went pale. But Blackstone's smile only widened, sharp and predatory. Economic terrorism, he repeated, as if savoring the words. How delightfully naive. Tell me, child, since you seem so confident in your moral superiority, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate that your intelligence matches your indignation? He clicked his remote, and a new slide appeared. This one was covered in complex equations, financial modeling that would challenge graduate students, let alone a 12-year-old girl. Here's a question no one in this room can answer, Blackstone announced, his voice carrying absolute certainty. A theoretical scenario involving hostile takeovers, shell companies, and strategic bankruptcy. Solve this puzzle, explain the methodology, and I'll do something unprecedented. I'll pay off whatever pathetic debt brought you to this prestigious institution. The hall erupted in whispers. Students turned to each other in amazement. A billionaire offering to pay a child's debt? It was impossible. It was. But, Blackstone continued, his voice cutting through the noise like ice, when you fail, and you will fail, you leave Harvard forever. You go back to whatever slum produced you and never darken these halls again. Maya stared at the impossible equation, her heart hammering against her ribs. The numbers and variables swam before her eyes, complex beyond anything she'd ever attempted. This wasn't a test of knowledge, it was public execution, designed to destroy her in front of everyone she'd tried so hard to impress. But as she studied the slide, something strange happened. The chaos of numbers began to organize itself in her mind, patterns emerging like constellations from a dark sky. And in those patterns, she recognized something that made her blood freeze in her veins. This wasn't just any theoretical scenario. This was the exact method used to destroy her father's company. Maya looked up at Richard Blackstone, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, she wasn't afraid. She was angry. I accept your challenge, Mr. Blackstone, she said, her 12-year-old voice carrying through the silent hall with surprising strength. But I think you should know something first. She paused, letting the moment stretch until even Blackstone's confident expression flickered with uncertainty. This isn't a theoretical scenario at all, is it? If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 2. The silence that followed Maya's words was absolute, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes or the moment before lightning strikes. 200 students held their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would be whispered about in Harvard's halls for decades to come. Richard Blackstone's steel-gray eyes narrowed to slits, studying the tiny girl who had just challenged him with the audacity of David facing Goliath. For a heartbeat, his polished composure flickered, revealing something cold and dangerous beneath the civilized veneer. Theoretical, he repeated slowly, his voice carrying a new edge that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. My dear child, everything in economics is theoretical until it becomes reality. Maya's small hands gripped the back of the chair in front of her, her knuckles white against the dark wood. She could feel every pair of eyes in the auditorium boring into her, waiting to see if the little girl from Detroit would crumble under the weight of a billionaire's attention. But she didn't crumble. Instead, she lifted her chin with a defiance that would have made her grandmother proud. Then let's make it reality, Maya said, her voice stronger now. Ask your question, Mr. Blackstone. A slow, predatory smile spread across Blackstone's face. He clicked his remote, and the projection screen filled with a complex web of numbers, equations, and corporate structures that would have intimidated seasoned Wall Street analysts. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackstone announced, his voice carrying the theatrical flair of a ringmaster introducing the main act, allow me to present a delicious puzzle. Consider this scenario carefully. Maya squinted at the screen, her exceptional mind already beginning to parse the intricate relationships between the variables displayed. Shell companies layered within shell companies. Debt instruments designed to disguise their true purpose. Financial structures so convoluted they seem deliberately obscured. We have Company A, Blackstone continued, using his laser pointer to highlight different sections of the diagram, a mid-sized manufacturing firm with strong fundamentals but temporary cash flow difficulties. Annual revenue of $52 million, employee base of 437, family-owned for 3 generations. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Those numbers, they were too specific, too exact to be coincidental. Her father's company, Washington Manufacturing, had employed exactly 437 people. She would know, she'd helped him count the names on the Christmas card list every December. Company A finds itself facing a series of unfortunate circumstances, Blackstone went on, his tone conversational, as if discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Lawsuits from suppliers claiming breach of contract. Environmental challenges that require expensive remediation. Key clients mysteriously canceling long-term agreements. Around the auditorium, graduate students frantically scribbled notes, trying to keep up with the complexity of what Blackstone was describing. But Maya wasn't taking notes. She was remembering her father's worried conversations with her mother, the late-night phone calls that had grown more frequent in the months before his death. Now, Blackstone continued, clicking to a new slide filled with even more bewildering financial calculations. The question becomes, how does one most efficiently acquire Company A's assets while minimizing acquisition costs and legal exposure? He turned his predatory smile toward the sea of confused faces. The solution requires understanding 7 distinct layers of financial manipulation, each designed to circumvent federal oversight while maintaining plausible legal deniability. The methodology involves strategic deployment of regulatory pressure, coordinated supplier disruption, and what we might call personnel management. Several students raised their hands tentatively, then lowered them again as the full complexity of the problem became apparent. This wasn't just advanced economics, it was a masterclass in corporate warfare disguised as academic theory. Come now, Blackstone taunted, his voice dripping with mock disappointment. Harvard's finest minds, and no one wishes to attempt an answer? Perhaps I've overestimated this institution's reputation. Professor Martinez cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Blackstone, perhaps this scenario is beyond the scope of an undergraduate. No, Maya's voice cut through the professor's diplomatic retreat like a blade through silk. Every head in the auditorium swiveled toward her small form in the back row. I'll answer it. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, driven by something deeper than academic pride or the desperate need for the debt relief Blackstone had promised. This was personal. This was about her father. Blackstone's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. Will you indeed? How ambitious. Very well, Miss Washington. Enlighten us. Maya's legs trembled as she stood fully upright, her borrowed shoes sliding slightly in the oversized sneakers. The cardigan fell open, revealing a faded t-shirt that had once belonged to her cousin Jerome. She looked impossibly young, impossibly small, facing down one of the most powerful men in America. But when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 12 years. "The first layer," Maya began, her child's voice ringing clearly through the silent hall, "involves establishing a network of seemingly independent shell companies, each incorporated in different states to obscure their common ownership. Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming are preferred due to their business-friendly privacy laws." Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Several graduate students looked up from their notes in surprise, recognizing sophisticated concepts they'd struggled with in their advanced coursework. Maya continued, her confidence growing as the numbers and relationships crystallized in her mind. Layer 2 requires cultivating relationships with key regulatory officials, not bribery, which would be illegal, but strategic campaign contributions and promises of lucrative consulting positions after their government service ends. Blackstone's expression had shifted from amused condescension to sharp attention. His security team, 2 men in expensive suits who had been standing unobtrusively near the lecture hall's exits, straightened slightly, their hands moving unconsciously toward concealed weapons. Layer 3, Maya pressed on, unaware of the dangerous currents she was stirring, involves coordinated pressure on Company A's supply chain. Shell Company B approaches Supplier X with a more attractive contract, but only if they immediately terminate their relationship with Company A. Shell Company C files nuisance lawsuits against Supplier Y, tying up their legal resources until they can no longer afford to honor their commitments to Company A. The hall had gone completely silent now, not even the rustle of paper or whisper of side conversations. Maya's analysis was too detailed, too precise, cutting through the theoretical veneer to reveal the ugly mechanics of corporate predation. Layer 4 focuses on the target company's customer base, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as painful memories gave weight to her words. Shell Company D offers Company A's clients significantly below market rates for similar services, subsidizing the losses through the other shell companies. The goal isn't profit, it's disruption. Company A loses revenue while being unable to match the artificially low prices. Professor Martinez had gone pale, recognizing that what he'd assumed was a theoretical exercise was revealing itself to be something far more sinister. Layer 5, Maya said, her small hands now gesturing as she warmed to her subject, involves what Mr. Blackstone euphemistically called personnel management. Key employees of Company A begin receiving job offers from competitors at substantially higher salaries. The most talented people leave, taking institutional knowledge and client relationships with them. Those who remain face increased scrutiny from regulatory agencies, anonymous tips about tax irregularities, even personal legal troubles that mysteriously appear. Blackstone's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, but Maya was too focused on her analysis to notice the subtle signs of his growing agitation. Layer 6 brings environmental and safety challenges, she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. Suddenly, Company A faces surprise inspections that reveal violations that somehow weren't noticed in previous reviews. Remediation costs mount. Insurance rates skyrocket. The company's credit rating drops as the perceived risks multiply. Several students were now staring openly at Maya, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just academic brilliance, this was intimate knowledge of corporate warfare tactics that shouldn't exist in the mind of a 12-year-old girl. And Layer 7, Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the silent hall, deals with the most stubborn obstacle of all, leadership that refuses to surrender. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackstone's security team exchanged meaningful glances, their hands now resting openly on concealed weapons. Sometimes, Maya continued, her child's voice taking on an eerie sophistication, Company A's management proves uncooperative. The CEO or lead accountant or head of operations develops what Mr. Blackstone called an unfortunate conscience. They threaten to expose the coordination between the shell companies. They contact federal investigators. They refuse to accept the inevitable. Maya's voice grew stronger, driven by 5 years of suppressed grief and growing understanding. In such cases, more direct intervention becomes necessary. Industrial accidents are arranged. Brake lines fail on dark roads. Heart attacks occur at surprisingly young ages, though the stress of fighting a losing battle against coordinated corporate assault certainly contributes to poor health outcomes. The last words fell into a silence so complete that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like thunder. Maya stood in the back row, her small form trembling with emotion and exhaustion, having just delivered an analysis that was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. Blackstone stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of cold calculation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality, respect tinged with something far more dangerous. "Remarkable," he said softly. "Truly remarkable. Your analysis demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of complex corporate strategies that most PhD candidates would struggle to articulate." He paused, his steel-gray eyes never leaving Maya's face. "Tell me, Miss Washington," Blackstone continued, his voice deceptively gentle, "where exactly did a 12-year-old girl from Detroit acquire such specialized knowledge?" Maya's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she had just done. In her determination to prove herself, in her need to honor her father's memory, she had revealed far more than academic understanding. She had demonstrated intimate familiarity with the exact methodology that had destroyed Washington manufacturing, familiarity that could only come from someone who had lived through it. Or someone who had studied it obsessively for 5 years. The security team was moving now, subtle shifts in position that spoke of training and coordination. Professor Martinez looked as though he might faint. The graduate students sensed the shift in atmosphere without understanding its source, the way animals sense approaching storms. But it was Blackstone's smile that made Maya's blood freeze in her veins. It was no longer the practiced charm of a public figure. It was the expression of a predator who had just identified his prey. "You see," Blackstone said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent auditorium, "your analysis wasn't just theoretically sound, Miss Washington. It was historically accurate." Maya's legs nearly gave way beneath her. Around the hall, students began to understand that they were witnessing something far beyond an academic exercise. This was personal. This was dangerous. "The methodology you described so eloquently," Blackstone continued, taking a step closer to the front row, "was employed quite successfully against a small Detroit manufacturing company approximately 5 years ago. Washington Manufacturing, if memory serves. A family business that proved surprisingly resistant to acquisition." Maya's hands gripped the chair in front of her so tightly her knuckles went white. The oversized cardigan suddenly felt suffocating, and she struggled to breathe as the full implications of her mistake crashed over her. "The company's owner, one Marcus Washington, proved particularly stubborn," Blackstone went on, his voice now carrying a casual cruelty that made several students visibly recoil. "A man of inconvenient principles who refused to accept fair market value for his assets. Who threatened to contact federal investigators about perfectly legal business practices." Maya's vision blurred as tears she refused to shed burned her eyes. "Such a tragic accident," Blackstone concluded, his steel-gray eyes locked on Maya's terrified face. "Brake failure on a rainy night. The sort of random tragedy that reminds us all how fragile life can be." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stood frozen in the back row, a 12-year-old girl who had just confessed to 5 years of investigating her father's murder, confessed to the very man who had orchestrated it. And Richard Blackstone's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. Maya's world tilted on its axis as Blackstone's words echoed through the silent auditorium. The faces around her blurred into a sea of shocked expressions, but she couldn't focus on any of them. All she could see was her father's face, the way he'd looked that last night, worried, determined, and heartbreakingly gentle as he'd kissed her forehead and promised everything would be better soon. She sank back into her seat, her small body trembling as the memories she'd kept locked away for 5 years came flooding back with devastating clarity. 5 years ago. 7-year-old Maya pressed her ear to her bedroom door, listening to the hushed argument coming from the kitchen below. Daddy's voice was strained, tight with an emotion she didn't understand, but that made her stomach hurt. "Rose, I have to do this. You don't understand what I've found. Marcus, please." Grandma Rose's voice carried a trembling fear that made Maya want to run downstairs and throw her arms around both of them. Think about Maya. Think about what you're risking. I am thinking about Maya. Daddy's voice rose, then immediately softened, as if he'd remembered his little girl was sleeping upstairs. I'm thinking about her future, about all the families Blackstone has destroyed. Mrs. Johnson down the street, her husband worked 30 years at Morrison Steel before Blackstone bought them out. 30 years, Rose, and his pension just vanished. They're losing their house. Maya crept to the top of the stairs, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. Through the banister spindles, she could see into the kitchen where Daddy sat at their yellow formica table, surrounded by papers and manila folders. His usually neat brown hair was disheveled, and his glasses sat crooked on his nose like they did when he'd been rubbing his temples. The numbers don't lie, he continued, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Blackstone Industries has been systematically draining pension funds from every company they acquire. Moving the money through shell companies, offshore accounts. It's brilliant, Rose. Evil, but brilliant. By the time the workers realize their retirement savings are gone, the paper trail is so convoluted that proving theft becomes nearly impossible. Grandma Rose moved around the table to place her weathered hands on Daddy's shoulders. Even at 7, Maya could see how much older her grandmother looked than she had just months before, as if worry had aged her and fast forward. How much money are we talking about, Marcus? Hundreds of millions, maybe more. The Hendersons, the Kowalskis, the entire Peterson family, all their retirements, gone. And tomorrow. Daddy's voice broke slightly. Tomorrow, Agent Martinez from the FBI is meeting me at the office. I'm turning over everything. Maya didn't understand all the words, but she understood the fear in Grandma Rose's voice, the way Daddy's hands shook as he gathered the papers. She understood that something terrible was happening to families like theirs, and that Daddy was trying to stop it. The next morning, Daddy made Mickey Mouse pancakes, her favorite, and helped her pick out her clothes for school. He was quieter than usual, but he smiled when she showed him the picture she'd drawn of their family, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of their little blue house with the crooked chimney. That's beautiful, baby girl, he'd said, kneeling down to her height and pulling her into one of his bear hugs that smelled like his aftershave and the coffee he drank every morning. You know Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky, right? More than chocolate ice cream? Maya had asked, giggling. More than chocolate ice cream with sprinkles and whipped cream and a cherry on top, he'd promised, kissing the tip of her nose. That evening, after Grandma Rose had picked her up from school and they'd had grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, Daddy came home later than usual. Maya was already in her pajamas, the pink ones with the dancing bears that Mama had bought her before the cancer took her away 2 years earlier. Daddy sat on the edge of her bed, his face serious but gentle. The papers from the kitchen table were gone, she noticed, and he carried himself differently, like he'd set down something very heavy. Maya, sweetheart, I need to tell you something important. She sat up in bed, clutching her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, to her chest. Are you in trouble, Daddy? His smile was sad but genuine. No, baby girl. Daddy's not in trouble. But I had to do something today that was very hard, something that will help a lot of families who have been hurt by some very bad people. Like superheroes do? Yeah, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Like superheroes do. And sometimes, when you fight bad people, they fight back. So things might be different for a while. But I promise you, Maya, I promise that everything I'm doing is to make sure you have a better life than the one I had growing up. Maya reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the scratchy stubble that appeared every evening. Will you still make Mickey Mouse pancakes? Daddy's laugh was choked with tears he was trying not to shed. Every Sunday for the rest of your life, if you want them. He tucked her in carefully, smoothing the covers and making sure Mr. Peanuts was positioned just right against her shoulder. Then he did something he'd never done before. He knelt beside her bed and held her small hand in both of his larger ones. Maya, I need you to promise me something. She nodded solemnly, sensing this was important. Promise me you'll always remember how much I love you. Promise me you'll take care of Grandma Rose. And promise me. His voice broke completely now, tears sliding down his cheeks. Promise me you'll never stop being curious, never stop asking questions, never stop believing that smart little girls can change the world. I promise, Daddy. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering longer than usual. That's my brave girl. Sweet dreams, baby. Daddy will see you in the morning. But he didn't. Maya woke to the sound of crying, harsh, broken sobs that seemed to shake the walls of their little house. She found Grandma Rose in the kitchen, still in her nightgown, clutching the phone with white knuckles while two police officers stood awkwardly by the door. There's been an accident, Officer Chin had said gently, his kind eyes full of sorrow. Your daddy's car went off the road last night. The rain made the pavement slippery, and his brakes, they failed. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. 7-year-old Maya had stared at them with the peculiar calmness that comes with shock, her mind unable to process the impossibility of a world without her father's Mickey Mouse pancakes and bedtime stories and promises of a better tomorrow. It wasn't until the funeral, when she saw men in expensive suits whispering in corners about unfortunate timing and such a tragic coincidence, that she began to understand. It wasn't until Agent Martinez approached Grandma Rose with red-rimmed eyes and empty hands, explaining that all of Marcus Washington's files had been destroyed in an accidental office fire the same night he died, that the 7-year-old girl began to suspect the truth. Her daddy hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered for trying to help people. And the man who had ordered his death was now standing 20 feet away, smiling at her with cold gray eyes. Present day. Maya blinked back to the lecture hall, to the 200 faces staring at her with mixtures of confusion, pity, and growing understanding. Blackstone stood at the front of the room like a predator savoring the moment before the kill, his polished appearance a stark contrast to the raw emotion she felt coursing through her small frame. You remember now, don't you? Blackstone's voice was silk over steel, carrying just enough false sympathy to make her skin crawl. Poor little Maya Washington, the accountant's daughter. I wondered when you'd piece it together. Maya's voice, when she found it, was barely a whisper. You killed him. I killed no one, Blackstone replied smoothly, his tone suggesting he was discussing nothing more controversial than the weather. Your father died in a tragic automotive accident. Brake failure, as I recall. Terribly dangerous, driving in the rain on those winding roads outside the city. But Maya was no longer the 7-year-old girl who had believed in accidents and coincidences. 5 years of secret study, 5 years of teaching herself economics and corporate law and financial forensics, had sharpened her mind into a weapon. She understood now what she'd been too young to grasp then, the intricate web of cause and effect that had led to her father's death. He was your head accountant, she said, her child's voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. He discovered what you were doing to the pension funds. All those workers, all those families, you stole their retirements. A murmur ran through the auditorium as students began to understand they were witnessing something far beyond academic discourse. This was personal. This was a reckoning 5 years in the making. Your father was a talented accountant, Blackstone acknowledged, his tone taking on a lecturing quality. Perhaps too talented for his own good. He had an inconvenient tendency to look beneath the surface of complex financial arrangements. To ask uncomfortable questions about perfectly legal business practices. Maya's hands balled into fists at her sides. He was going to the FBI. So he was. Blackstone's smile was razor-sharp. Agent Martinez, if memory serves. Quite an ambitious plan for a small-town accountant who thought he could take on a Fortune 500 company with nothing but moral indignation and a handful of documents. Documents that mysteriously burned in an office fire the night he died. Coincidences do happen, Miss Washington. Fire is terribly destructive to paper records. Almost as destructive as automotive accidents are to inconvenient witnesses. The casual cruelty in his voice made several students visibly recoil. Professor Martinez looked as though he might be sick. But Maya held Blackstone's gaze, no longer the terrified little girl who had cowered in the back row. You destroyed everything, she said, her voice carrying a pain that made grown adults in the audience shift uncomfortably. Our house, our savings, Daddy's life insurance policy that mysteriously became void due to suspicious circumstances. You left Grandma Rose with nothing but medical bills and me to raise. Business, my dear child, is not a charity, Blackstone replied, echoing his earlier words. Your father chose to interfere with matters beyond his understanding. Actions have consequences. Even for accountants with oversized consciences. Maya felt something shift inside her, a transformation from grief to fury that had been building for 5 years. When she spoke again, her voice carried an authority that seemed impossible coming from such a small form. You're right, she said quietly. Actions do have consequences, Mr. Blackstone. And for 5 years, I've been studying every consequence of yours. She stood straighter, no longer trying to hide in her oversized cardigan, no longer ashamed of her borrowed shoes and second-hand clothes. Every night after Grandma Rose comes home from cleaning your offices, yes, your offices, Mr. Blackstone, though I doubt you've ever noticed the old black woman emptying your trash, I study. Economics, corporate law, forensic accounting. Everything Daddy was teaching himself before you had him killed. The auditorium was dead silent now, the weight of Maya's words settling over the crowd like a funeral shroud. I know about the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I know about the political contributions that bought you regulatory immunity. I know about the pension funds you've stolen from 17 different companies over the past decade. Maya's voice grew stronger with each revelation. But most importantly, Mr. Blackstone, I know about the trail of bodies you've left behind. 12 people in the last 10 years who got too close to the truth. 12 families destroyed, just like mine. Blackstone's mask of composed civility finally cracked, revealing something cold and dangerous underneath. His security team had moved closer, their hands resting openly on concealed weapons now. Careful, little girl, Blackstone said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. Accusations like that could be considered slander. And slanderous little girls sometimes find themselves facing the same unfortunate accidents as their fathers. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 4. The 2 days following Maya's confrontation with Blackstone passed in a haze of paranoid vigilance that made her feel ancient despite her 12 years. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, every stranger on the street a potential threat. The weight of knowing too much pressed down on her small shoulders like a physical burden, making even the simple act of walking to her morning classes feel like navigating a minefield. Tuesday morning found Maya hurrying across Harvard Yard, her worn backpack clutched protectively against her chest. The early October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the ancient brick buildings cast long shadows that seemed to reach for her with grasping fingers. Students moved in clusters around her, their casual laughter and conversations about weekend plans feeling surreal against the backdrop of her terror. She'd barely slept since the lecture, startling awake every few hours to peer through her dorm room's narrow window, searching the darkness for signs of surveillance. When exhaustion finally claimed her in the pre-dawn hours, her dreams were filled with her father's voice warning her to run, to hide, to become invisible before Blackstone's reach found her. But Maya couldn't run. Not when she was so close to understanding the full scope of what had been done to her family, to all the families Blackstone had destroyed in his relentless pursuit of wealth and power. As she climbed the steps to Hamilton Hall where her advanced mathematics class was held, Maya noticed the man in the charcoal suit for the 3rd time in 2 days. He stood near the fountain, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but his eyes tracked her movement with the practiced attention of someone accustomed to surveillance. When she'd first spotted him outside her dormitory building Monday morning, she'd dismissed it as coincidence. The second sighting, near the library where she'd gone to research pension fund regulations, had triggered her first real spike of fear. Now, seeing him again, Maya felt her stomach clench with the sick certainty that her worst suspicions were true. Blackstone wasn't content to simply threaten her in front of a lecture hall full of witnesses. He was having her watched, cataloging her movements, learning her patterns. The thought made her skin crawl with the particular horror that comes from being hunted by something infinitely more powerful than yourself. Inside Hamilton Hall, Maya tried to focus on Professor Kim's explanation of advanced calculus, but her attention kept drifting to the windows, searching for any sign of the man in the charcoal suit. The elegant mathematical proofs that usually captivated her seemed abstract and meaningless against the very real danger stalking her through Harvard's hallowed halls. When class ended, Maya lingered in the building, watching through the tall windows as students streamed across the yard. The man in the charcoal suit was gone, but that brought no relief. If Blackstone's surveillance team was professional enough to remain undetected when they chose to be, then spotting them at all meant they wanted to be seen. They were letting her know she was being watched, that her every movement was catalogued and reported. The psychological warfare was working. Maya felt like a mouse being toyed with by cats, allowed to scurry freely only because her captors found her terror amusing. By Wednesday afternoon, the surveillance had become impossible to ignore. A woman in a beige coat appeared outside Maya's dormitory just as she returned from her economics seminar. A different man, this one in a navy windbreaker, followed her to the library and sat 3 tables away, never opening the book he'd brought. When Maya walked to the campus coffee shop for her usual afternoon tea, a small luxury she allowed herself with the few dollars Grandma Rose had pressed into her hand, yet another watcher materialized at the counter, ordering complicated drinks that took long enough to prepare that he could observe her entire visit. They were no longer bothering to hide their presence. The message was clear: we see you. We know where you go, who you talk to, how you spend every moment of your day. And there's nothing a 12-year-old girl can do to stop us. That evening, Maya sat in her tiny dorm room, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. The girl looking back at her seemed impossibly young, impossibly fragile to be carrying the weight of such dangerous knowledge. Her father's voice echoed in her memory: promise me you'll never stop being curious, never stop asking questions, never stop believing that smart little girls can change the world. But how could one small girl change anything when the very act of trying made her a target for forces that could snuff out her life as easily as they had her father's? The answer came Thursday morning when Maya discovered her locker had been broken into. She'd arrived at her high school early, as had become her habit, hoping to blend into the crowd of older students and perhaps shake any surveillance for a few precious hours. Jefferson High School served as her home base when she wasn't at Harvard, the place where she was still allowed to be something resembling a normal 12-year-old girl, even if that normalcy was largely illusion. But as Maya approached her locker, she could see immediately that something was wrong. The metal door hung slightly ajar, and scratches around the lock mechanism told the story of professional entry. Her hands trembled as she pulled the door open fully, revealing the devastation within. Every folder was gone. Every notebook, every carefully copied document, every piece of the puzzle she'd been assembling for 5 years, vanished. The financial records she'd painstakingly recreated from memory, the timeline of her father's final weeks, the connections she'd drawn between Blackstone Industries and the shell companies used to hide stolen pension funds, all of it had been taken with surgical precision. But they'd left her textbooks. They'd left her normal school supplies. They'd taken only the materials related to her investigation, leaving behind clear evidence that this wasn't random vandalism but targeted theft. Maya sank against the wall of lockers, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. 5 years of work, 5 years of dedicating every spare moment to understanding what had happened to her father, gone in a single night. The violation felt almost physical, as if someone had reached into her chest and torn out her heart. Maya? Honey, what's wrong? She looked up to find Mrs. Patterson, her guidance counselor, approaching with concern written across her kind face. Maya tried to speak, tried to explain, but how could she make anyone understand that her locker had been robbed by billionaire corporate assassins seeking to cover up a decade of pension fund theft and multiple murders? Someone broke into my locker, Maya managed, her voice small and hollow. Mrs. Patterson examined the damaged lock with a frown. We'll need to report this to security. Was anything valuable taken? Maya almost laughed at the bitter irony. Valuable? The stolen materials were worth more than money. They were the only hope she'd had of proving her father's murder and bringing his killer to justice. But how could she explain that to a guidance counselor who thought Maya's biggest problems involved adjusting to advanced placement classes and social integration? Just some personal papers, Maya said finally. Family stuff. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but what choice did she have? Who would believe that a 12-year-old girl possessed evidence that could topple a Fortune 500 company? Who would take seriously the accusation that Richard Blackstone, pillar of the business community and philanthropic donor, was a murderer and thief? The rest of the school day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Maya attended classes, took notes, participated in discussions about American history and advanced chemistry, all while feeling like she was watching someone else's life from a great distance. The other students seemed impossibly young, their concerns about upcoming tests and school dances so trivial compared to the life-and-death stakes that had consumed her world. During lunch, Maya sat alone in the library, trying to reconstruct from memory what had been stolen. But the task felt overwhelming, like trying to rebuild a house with nothing but the echo of hammer blows. Worse, she now knew with absolute certainty that Blackstone's people were watching her every move. Any attempt to restart her investigation would be detected and neutralized before she could make meaningful progress. The realization that followed was even more crushing. She was trapped. Too young to be taken seriously by authorities, too isolated to find allies who could help her, too closely watched to operate in secret. Blackstone had effectively neutered her threat while maintaining the illusion that he'd done nothing more than suffer the accusations of an emotionally unstable child. That afternoon, Maya called Grandma Rose from the school's pay phone, using quarters she'd saved from her lunch money. "Grandma?" Maya's voice cracked as soon as she heard her grandmother's familiar hello. "Baby girl? What's wrong? You sound upset." Maya closed her eyes, drawing strength from the warm concern in her grandmother's voice. I think I need to come home. To Detroit. Maybe take a break from the program." "Maya, honey, has something happened? Someone been bothering you?" The careful way her grandmother phrased the question sent alarm bells ringing in Maya's mind. "Grandma, is everything okay? Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Another pause, longer this time. When Rose spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "There's been some men asking questions around the neighborhood. About you, about the program you're in. Nice enough fellows, they said they were from some education foundation doing follow-up interviews." "But Maya..." Rose's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I've been cleaning offices for 40 years, baby. I know the difference between education people and the other kind." Maya's blood went cold. If Blackstone's people were approaching her grandmother directly, then the situation had escalated beyond mere surveillance. They were no longer content to simply watch, they were actively investigating, probing for weaknesses, looking for pressure points they could exploit. "Grandma, listen to me carefully," Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Don't talk to those men anymore. Don't answer questions about me or about Daddy. And if you see them again, call the police immediately." "Maya, you're scaring me. What kind of trouble are you in?" How could she explain that she wasn't in trouble so much as she was in mortal danger? That her investigation into her father's death had attracted the attention of people who killed as casually as others fired employees? "I'm not in trouble, Grandma. But I think I've learned some things that some very bad people don't want me to know." Rose was quiet for so long that Maya thought the connection had been lost. When her grandmother finally spoke, her voice carried the weariness of someone who had lived through too much pain already. "Your daddy's been gone 5 years, baby girl. Maybe it's time to let sleeping dogs lie." "I can't, Grandma. Not when I'm so close to the truth. Not when there are other families out there being hurt by the same people who killed Daddy." "And what happens when they decide you're too close to the truth, Maya? What happens when I lose the only family I have left?" The question hung between them like a blade, cutting through Maya's determination with surgical precision. For the first time since she'd begun her investigation, she truly understood the full cost of her quest for justice. It wasn't just her own life at risk, it was the only person left in the world who loved her. "I'll be careful, Grandma. I promise." Careful isn't enough against people with unlimited money and no conscience, baby. Maybe it's time for you to come home for a while. Let this thing cool down." Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the phone booth, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Stay and continue fighting for the truth, risking not just her own life but her grandmother's safety. Or retreat, abandon 5 years of work, and let her father's murder remain unavenged while Blackstone continued destroying other families. Let me think about it, Grandma. Just, be careful, okay? And if anything happens, anything at all that feels wrong, you call me immediately. That evening, Maya walked back to her dorm through Harvard Yard as twilight painted the ancient buildings in shades of purple and gold. The beauty of the campus, which had once filled her with wonder and possibility, now felt like a stage set designed to lull her into false security. Every shadow could hide a watcher, every student could be a threat, every moment of apparent safety could be the calm before violence erupted. As she climbed the stairs to her floor, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Smart girls who ask too many questions sometimes find themselves as accident-prone as their fathers. Time to consider your grandmother's health, little mouse. Maya's hands shook as she read the message, the casual cruelty of it making her stomach lurch. They weren't just threatening her anymore, they were threatening Grandma Rose, the one person in the world Maya couldn't bear to lose. She was still staring at the message when she reached her dorm room door and found it standing open. Maya approached cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room beyond was dark, but she could see that furniture had been moved, drawers pulled open, her few possessions scattered across the floor. Like her locker, the search had been thorough and professional, designed to send a message as much as to gather intelligence. But it was the photograph on her desk that made her blood freeze. Her father's picture, the one she kept by her bedside, showing him laughing as he pushed 7-year-old Maya on a swing, had been turned face down. Placed on top of it was a single black rose. The symbolism was unmistakable. Death had visited this room, and it would return soon for its intended target. Maya backed out of the room and ran for the stairwell, her feet pounding against the stairs as she fled the building. She had to get home, had to make sure Grandma Rose was safe, had to. Her phone rang as she burst through the dormitory's front doors. Rose's number. Grandma? Maya. Her grandmother's voice was weak, thready, nothing like the strong woman who had raised her. Baby, I need you to come home. Something's wrong. I can't seem to catch my breath. Grandma, where are you? Are you hurt? Kitchen floor, Rose whispered, and Maya could hear the labored breathing that meant her grandmother was struggling for every word. Felt dizzy after dinner, chest hurts, but Maya, this doesn't feel like. The line went dead. Maya stood frozen on the sidewalk, her phone clutched in nerveless fingers as the full horror of the situation crashed over her. The text message. The black rose. Her grandmother's sudden illness just hours after receiving direct threats. This wasn't a heart attack. This was an assassination attempt, and Maya was too far away to help the only person in the world who mattered more to her than justice for her father. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 5. The 4-hour bus ride from Cambridge to Detroit felt like traveling through purgatory. Maya sat hunched in a window seat near the back, her small body shaking with exhaustion and terror as urban landscapes blurred past in the darkness. Every stop made her flinch, expecting to see Blackstone's men boarding to finish what they'd started with Grandma Rose. Her phone had remained stubbornly silent since that final, devastating call. No matter how many times she dialed the hospital, no matter how she pleaded with the nurses to tell her something, anything, about Rose Washington's condition, she was met with the same infuriating response: information can only be released to immediate family members over 18. At 12 years old, Maya existed in a legal limbo where she was too young to be given information about the person she loved most in the world, too young to make medical decisions, too young to do anything but sit helplessly while the woman who had raised her fought for life in a hospital bed. The irony was bitter as poison. She was brilliant enough to unravel corporate conspiracies that had baffled federal investigators, but she wasn't old enough to be told whether her grandmother was alive or dead. Detroit's skyline appeared through the grimy bus window like a collection of broken teeth against the pre-dawn sky. Maya pressed her face to the glass, studying the familiar silhouette of the city that had shaped her, looking for signs of the surveillance she was certain had followed her from Harvard. But exhaustion made it difficult to focus, and fear made every shadow seem threatening. The bus station downtown reeked of diesel fuel and human desperation. Maya pulled her father's old baseball cap low over her face and shuffled through the terminal with the practiced invisibility she'd learned growing up poor in a city that had forgotten how to care for its most vulnerable children. Nobody looked twice at another skinny black girl with worn clothes and hollow eyes. Detroit had too many of them to notice one more. She used quarters saved from her meal money to call a taxi, giving the driver the address of Detroit General Hospital with a voice that sounded far older than her 12 years. The ride through empty streets felt surreal, as if she were visiting a ghost town that had once been her home. The hospital lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of early morning shift changes. Maya approached the information desk with her heart hammering against her ribs, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I'm here to see Rose Washington," she told the elderly volunteer, a kind-faced woman whose name tag read Dolores. "And you are?" "Her granddaughter, Maya Washington." Dolores studied her with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen too much human suffering to be easily fooled. "Honey, you look awful young to be here by yourself. Where are your parents?" Maya's throat tightened. "My grandmother is all I have. Please. I just need to know if she's okay." Something in her voice, the raw desperation of a child who had already lost too much, seemed to reach the volunteer. Dolores leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Intensive care, 4th floor. Room 427. But visiting hours don't start until 8, and they're real strict about age limits up there." "How is she?" Dolores glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Stable, but they're running all kinds of tests. The doctors are puzzled by her symptoms. Heart attack patients don't usually present with." She paused, seeming to catch herself. "Well, I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Maya's blood chilled. "What symptoms?" "Oh honey, I really shouldn't. Please." Maya's voice broke completely now, tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilling down her cheeks. "She's all I have left in the world." Dolores looked around once more, then leaned even closer. "The neurological symptoms don't match cardiac arrest. Tremors, confusion, difficulty breathing, it's almost like she was." She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Like she was what?" "Like she was poisoned," Dolores whispered, the word hanging between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Maya's knees nearly buckled. Hearing her worst fears confirmed felt like taking a physical blow, but it also crystallized her determination. If Grandma Rose was fighting for life because of Maya's investigation, then Maya owed it to her to finish what her father had started. "Thank you," Maya managed, backing away from the desk before her emotions overwhelmed her completely. She found a bathroom and locked herself in a stall, letting the tears come in great, shuddering waves that left her feeling hollow and ancient. When she finally emerged, her reflection in the mirror showed a girl who looked like she'd aged years in a single night. But her eyes held something new, a cold fury that reminded her uncomfortably of Blackstone's predatory stare. Maya took the hospital elevator to the 4th floor, her heart racing as she approached the intensive care unit. Through the security door's small windows, she could see a maze of machines and monitors, patients connected to life support systems that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. Room 427 was near the end of the hall. Maya pressed her face to the window and felt her world tilt on its axis. Grandma Rose lay motionless in the hospital bed, her usually vibrant presence reduced to a collection of tubes and wires. Machines monitored her heartbeat, her breathing, her brain activity, their digital displays painting abstract portraits of a life hanging in the balance. Her beautiful dark skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made her look fragile as old paper. But she was alive. The steady beep of the heart monitor confirmed that Rose Washington was still fighting, still refusing to surrender to whatever poison Blackstone's people had used to silence her. Maya stood at that window for nearly an hour, memorizing every detail of her grandmother's face, drawing strength from the stubborn rhythm of machines that proved the most important person in her world hadn't given up yet. When visiting hours officially began at 8, Maya tried to enter the ICU but was turned away by a stern-faced nurse who cited hospital policy about unaccompanied minors. It didn't matter that Maya explained her situation, didn't matter that she was clearly the patient's only family. Rules were rules, and 12-year-old girls didn't qualify for exceptions. Maya left the hospital feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life, but also more determined. If the adults in charge wouldn't let her help Grandma Rose directly, then she would help in the only way she knew how, by finding the evidence that could bring down the man responsible for her grandmother's condition. The taxi ride to their old neighborhood felt like traveling backward through time. Streets that had once bustled with working families now showed the scars of economic devastation: abandoned houses, empty lots where homes had once stood, businesses boarded up and forgotten. The house where Maya had spent the first 7 years of her life sat in the middle of this urban decay like a monument to better times. 1247 Maple Street had been empty since they'd lost it to foreclosure 6 months after her father's death. The bank had seized the property when Rose could no longer make mortgage payments on a cleaning woman's salary, adding one more layer of trauma to an already devastated family. Maya paid the taxi driver and waited until his taillights disappeared before approaching the house that had once been her sanctuary. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, the windows boarded up with plywood that bore graffiti tags and weather stains. The yellow paint her father had applied so carefully the summer before his death had peeled and faded, giving the whole structure a diseased appearance. But Maya knew this house's secrets. She knew about the loose board in the back fence that could be pulled aside, about the basement window that had never latched properly, about the hiding places her father had shown her during games of hide-and-seek that felt like lifetimes ago. The basement window yielded to pressure just as it always had, swinging open with a rusty squeal that seemed impossibly loud in the early morning silence. Maya squeezed through the narrow opening, dropping into the darkness of the house where she'd once felt completely safe. The basement smelled of mold and abandonment, but Maya navigated it from memory, her hands finding the wall switch that still somehow had power. Weak light revealed a space that had once housed her father's workshop, where he'd taught her to use basic tools and explained how things worked with the patient enthusiasm of a man who loved learning for its own sake. Maya climbed the basement stairs to the main floor, each creaking step releasing ghosts of better times. The kitchen where her father had made Mickey Mouse pancakes every Sunday. The living room where they'd watched movies on Friday nights, sharing bowls of popcorn while Rose worked her crossword puzzles in the corner chair. Her childhood bedroom was exactly as she'd left it 5 years ago, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. The bed where her father had tucked her in that final night. The bookshelf filled with picture books and early readers. The wall where she'd hung drawings of stick-figure families and houses with crooked chimneys. But Maya wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here for what her father had hidden behind that wall. The loose baseboard had always been their secret. During one of their hide-and-seek games, 7-year-old Maya had discovered that a section of baseboard in her bedroom could be pulled away, revealing a small cavity between the wall studs. Her father had been amazed by her discovery, calling her his little detective, and making it their special hiding place for treasures and notes. What Maya hadn't known until years later was that her father had used that same hiding place for something far more important than childhood games. Her fingers found the familiar loose edge of the baseboard, and it pulled away just as easily as it had when she was 7. But instead of finding childhood treasures, Maya discovered something that made her breath catch in her throat. A fireproof document safe, no bigger than a shoebox, tucked deep into the wall cavity. Maya's hands shook as she pulled the safe free, her heart hammering so hard she was afraid it might be audible throughout the empty house. The safe required a combination, but she knew without thinking what numbers her father would have chosen: her birthday. July 15, 2011. The lock clicked open with a soft snick that sounded like salvation. Inside the safe, Maya found her father's final gift to her, and to every family Blackstone had destroyed. Documents filled the small space with mathematical precision. Bank records showing pension fund transfers. Corporate filings revealing shell company structures. Financial statements proving systematic theft spanning more than a decade. Email printouts containing instructions for moving stolen money through offshore accounts. And at the bottom of the stack, a USB drive labeled simply "Insurance." Maya's hands trembled as she photographed each document with her phone, the evidence of corporate malfeasance and systematic theft flowing past her camera lens like a catalog of human misery. Hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from working families. Pension funds that had simply vanished, leaving elderly workers with nothing but broken promises and empty accounts. Including the account that should have funded her grandmother's retirement, ensuring Rose Washington wouldn't have to clean office buildings until arthritis crippled her hands. Maya was so focused on documenting the evidence that she almost missed the sound of footsteps on the front porch. She froze, her phone halfway through photographing a document that detailed the theft of $847,000 from the Detroit Municipal Workers' Pension Fund. The footsteps were careful, deliberate, the measured pace of professionals who knew their business. Through her bedroom window, Maya caught a glimpse of two men in dark suits approaching the house with the confident stride of people who had every right to be there. The same men who had been watching her at Harvard. The same men who had poisoned her grandmother. They had found her. Maya stuffed the documents back into the safe, pocketed the USB drive, and looked desperately around her childhood bedroom for an escape route. The window faced the backyard, but it was a 12-foot drop to the ground, and she could hear more footsteps circling the house. The front door exploded inward with the sound of splintering wood. Heavy boots pounded across the floors below, and she could hear voices coordinating a systematic search. Check the basement. I'll take the upstairs. Copy that. Remember, this needs to look like an electrical fire. Old wiring happens all the time in these abandoned houses. Maya's blood turned to ice water. They weren't just here to capture her, they were here to destroy the evidence and eliminate any witnesses. Her childhood home, the last physical connection to her father, was about to become her tomb. She crept to her bedroom window and forced it open as quietly as possible. The drop to the backyard looked impossibly far, but she could hear boots on the stairs now, growing closer with each second. Taking a deep breath that tasted like terror and determination in equal measure, Maya climbed out onto the narrow window ledge, clutching the precious USB drive in one hand while gripping the window frame with the other. Below her, a third man emerged from the house's back entrance, carrying what looked like a toolbox but moving with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. Maya realized with crystal clarity that she had perhaps 30 seconds before the house, and anyone still inside it, was reduced to rubble and ash. She let go of the window frame and dropped into space, praying that 12 years of childhood resilience would be enough to survive the landing. Maya hit the overgrown grass hard, rolling instinctively as her father had taught her when they'd played in this same backyard years ago. Pain shot through her left ankle, but she forced herself to keep moving, crawling behind an old storage shed as voices erupted from the house behind her. Movement in the backyard. Negative on the subject upstairs. House is clear. Timers set for 2 minutes. Everyone out. Maya pressed herself against the shed's rotting wood, fighting to control her breathing as Blackstone's men evacuated the house with military efficiency. Through gaps in the fence, she watched them retreat to waiting vehicles, their faces visible in the growing daylight. She recognized one of them from Harvard, the man in the charcoal suit who had been watching her for days. The explosion, when it came, was surprisingly quiet, more of a deep whoosh than the Hollywood dramatics Maya had expected. But the fireball that erupted from her childhood home was real enough, consuming in seconds the place where she'd felt safest in the world. Maya clutched the USB drive tighter, tears streaming down her face as she watched her past burn away in flames designed to hide the evidence of corporate murder. But they had missed one crucial detail in their professional thoroughness. Maya Washington was no longer in that house. And she was no longer just a 12-year-old girl seeking answers about her father's death. She was the only witness to their crime, the only person alive who could prove what they'd done. And she was very, very angry. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 6. Maya limped through Detroit's industrial district as dawn painted the sky in shades of copper and ash, her left ankle throbbing with each step while smoke from her destroyed childhood home still stained the horizon behind her. The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in her pocket, its weight seeming to increase with each block she put between herself and the smoldering ruins of 1247 Maple Street. Her father's baseball cap sat low over her eyes, and she kept to the shadows between abandoned warehouses and empty lots, moving with the careful invisibility that came from a lifetime of being overlooked by adults who saw poor black children as problems to be managed rather than people to be protected. Every car that passed made her flinch, every distant siren made her heart race, but she forced herself to keep moving toward the only sanctuary she could think of. The morning commuter rush was beginning, and Maya used the growing crowds to mask her movement through the city. She caught a bus heading toward the university district, paying her fare with crumpled dollar bills and settling into a seat near the back where she could watch for pursuit while trying to look like just another student heading to early classes. The USB drive seemed to burn against her leg through her jeans pocket. Whatever her father had stored on that device had been important enough to hide for 5 years, important enough that professional killers would destroy an entire house to prevent its discovery. The paper documents she'd photographed had been damning enough, evidence of systematic pension fund theft spanning more than a decade, but Maya suspected the digital files contained something even more devastating. Something worth committing murder to keep secret. The bus dropped her 6 blocks from Wayne State University, where Ms. Elena Rodriguez maintained her office as coordinator of the Advanced Placement Acceleration Program. Maya had first met her 3 years ago, when test scores and academic recommendations had identified her as a candidate for advanced educational opportunities that could lift her out of poverty and into a future her father had dreamed of but never lived to see. Ms. Rodriguez had been different from the other educators Maya had encountered. Where most adults seemed either patronizing or dismissive when dealing with gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds, Elena Rodriguez had treated Maya like a person worthy of respect and genuine concern. She'd fought bureaucratic battles to secure Maya's placement at Harvard, navigated the complex financial aid process that made the program theoretically affordable, and served as both academic advisor and surrogate parental figure during Maya's most difficult adjustments to university life. More importantly, she was the only adult Maya knew who might believe an impossible story about corporate conspiracy and attempted murder. The Wayne State campus bustled with early morning activity as Maya made her way to the education building where Ms. Rodriguez kept her program offices. Students hurried between classes, professors carried coffee cups and briefcases with the harried efficiency of people perpetually running late, and groundskeepers tended to landscaping that somehow managed to thrive despite Detroit's urban decay. Maya climbed 3 flights of stairs to avoid the elevator's security cameras, her injured ankle protesting with each step. The hallway outside Ms. Rodriguez's office was empty, and Maya could see light under the door. Her program coordinator was an early riser who often arrived before 7 to handle administrative tasks in the quiet hours before student appointments began. Maya knocked softly, a pattern they'd established years ago so Ms. Rodriguez would know it was her. "Come in, Maya," came the familiar voice, warm with the slight accent that hinted at Elena Rodriguez's Puerto Rican heritage. Maya pushed through the door and immediately felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The office was exactly as she remembered, walls covered with academic achievement certificates and photographs of successful program graduates, a desk organized with mathematical precision, and bookshelves filled with educational psychology texts and college guides. The space radiated competence and care, a sanctuary where brilliant but struggling children could find adult advocacy in a world that often seemed designed to defeat them. Ms. Rodriguez looked up from her computer with the quick smile that had always made Maya feel valued, but the expression shifted to concern as she took in Maya's appearance. Her program coordinator was a woman in her early 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and silver-streaked hair that she wore in a practical bun. She dressed professionally but not expensively, projecting the authority of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than inherited privilege. "Maya, honey, what are you doing here? You should be at Harvard for your Thursday morning seminars." Ms. Rodriguez rose from behind her desk, moving around to examine Maya more closely. "And you look terrible. Have you been sleeping? Eating properly?" Maya felt tears threatening for the first time since leaving the hospital. The simple human concern in Ms. Rodriguez's voice, after hours of being hunted and threatened and watching her past literally go up in smoke, nearly broke through the emotional barriers she'd built to survive the night. "Ms. Rodriguez, I need help," Maya managed, her 12-year-old voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "Something terrible has happened, and I don't know who else to trust." Elena Rodriguez's expression shifted from maternal concern to sharp attention, and Maya noticed details she'd never observed before, the way her coordinator's eyes automatically scanned the hallway behind Maya before closing the door, the unconscious positioning that kept Ms. Rodriguez between Maya and the window, the subtle tension that suggested someone trained to recognize and respond to danger. "Sit down, sweetheart," Ms. Rodriguez said gently, guiding Maya to the comfortable chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's wrong." Maya pulled the USB drive from her pocket and placed it on the desk between them like a small nuclear device. My father didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by Richard Blackstone because he discovered evidence of massive pension fund theft. And last night, they tried to kill my grandmother. The words tumbled out in a rush. 5 years of investigation, the confrontation at Harvard, the systematic surveillance, the break-in at her locker, Grandma Rose's poisoning, the evidence hidden in her childhood home, and the narrow escape from professional killers who had destroyed the last physical connection to her father. Ms. Rodriguez listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. When Maya finished, the office fell silent except for the distant sounds of campus life filtering through the windows. Maya, Ms. Rodriguez said slowly, I need you to understand something important before we go any further. She moved to her desk drawer and withdrew something that made Maya's breath catch, a leather badge case that she opened to reveal federal identification. My name is Elena Rodriguez, but I'm not just a program coordinator. I'm Special Agent Rodriguez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Maya stared at the badge as if it were a snake that might strike. You're FBI? I've been assigned to your case for 5 years, Maya. Since the night your father was murdered. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as implications cascaded through Maya's mind. My case? But I was just a 7-year-old girl. Why would the FBI? Agent Rodriguez returned to her chair, her posture shifting subtly from educator to law enforcement professional. Because your father, Marcus Washington, wasn't just a corporate accountant who stumbled onto evidence of pension fund theft. He was a federal informant who had been working with us for 8 months to build a case against Blackstone Industries. Maya felt as though someone had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. Daddy was working with the FBI? Marcus came to us after he discovered the first evidence of systematic pension fund manipulation. He was a good man, Maya, a man who couldn't stand watching working families have their retirement savings stolen while Blackstone profited from their suffering. We asked him to continue his normal duties while documenting evidence of the conspiracy. And then Blackstone found out. Agent Rodriguez nodded grimly. We believe Marcus's cover was blown when he tried to access files related to offshore banking operations. Blackstone's internal security flagged the unusual account activity, and Marcus became a target for elimination. Maya struggled to process the revelation that her father had been a hero in a federal investigation rather than simply a principled accountant who had discovered wrongdoing by accident. The night he died, he told me he'd done something to help families who had been hurt by bad people. He said things might be different for a while, but that everything he was doing was to give me a better life. He was supposed to meet with our team the next morning to turn over the evidence he'd gathered. When he didn't show up, we knew something had gone wrong. By the time we reached the accident scene, Agent Rodriguez's voice trailed off. You knew it wasn't an accident. We suspected, but we couldn't prove it. Blackstone's people are professionals. They make murders look like natural causes or random accidents. And without Marcus's evidence, which was destroyed in the convenient office fire that same night, we had nothing actionable against Blackstone Industries. Maya leaned back in her chair, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. So you've been watching me for 5 years? Protecting you, Agent Rodriguez corrected gently. We knew Blackstone would eventually realize that Marcus might have shared information with his family. A 7-year-old girl wasn't an immediate threat, but a brilliant 12-year-old with her father's investigative instincts and a photographic memory. She gestured toward the USB drive. You became exactly the threat we knew you could become. The Harvard program. My acceptance wasn't really about my test scores, was it? Agent Rodriguez's expression was both proud and apologetic. Your test scores are genuinely exceptional, Maya. Your acceptance was completely legitimate. But we did influence the process to ensure you'd be placed in a program where I could monitor your safety and academic development. Maya felt a complex mixture of betrayal and relief. On one hand, the adult she'd trusted most had been lying to her for years about her fundamental identity. On the other hand, that same adult had been protecting her from forces that would have killed her if they'd known about her investigation. Does this mean the FBI believes me about what happened last night? Every word. We've had teams monitoring Blackstone's communications for years, waiting for him to make a mistake that would give us actionable evidence. When we intercepted communications about containing the Washington situation, we knew you were in immediate danger. Agent Rodriguez moved to her computer and began typing rapidly. I'm calling for immediate backup and protective custody. With the evidence you've recovered, combined with what our surveillance teams have documented, we finally have enough to move against Blackstone Industries. Maya watched her coordinator, her protector, work with professional efficiency, and for the first time in hours, she felt something resembling hope. The USB drive her father had hidden contained the missing piece of a federal investigation that had been stalled for 5 years. Grandma Rose's poisoning would be investigated as attempted murder rather than dismissed as a medical emergency. The families whose pension funds had been stolen would finally see justice. Agent Rodriguez, Maya said quietly, thank you. For protecting me, for believing in me, for helping me become someone who could finish what Daddy started. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her computer with eyes that held both professional satisfaction and genuine maternal affection. Your father would be incredibly proud of you, Maya. You've shown courage that most adults couldn't muster, and intelligence that's helped crack a case we've been working on for. The window behind Agent Rodriguez's desk exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The federal agent spun toward the threat with trained reflexes, but the sniper's bullet had already found its mark, striking her center mass with devastating precision. Agent Rodriguez collapsed behind her desk, blood spreading across her white blouse as she struggled to reach for the service weapon holstered beneath her jacket. Maya screamed, diving toward her fallen protector as more gunshots shattered the remaining windows. The office that had felt like sanctuary moments before became a war zone, with federal identification scattered across the floor next to pools of blood and broken glass. Maya, Agent Rodriguez whispered, her voice growing weaker with each word. Run. Take the drive. Find Agent Martinez, he's still alive. The sounds of boots pounding up the stairwell echoed through the building as Blackstone's professionals moved to eliminate the last witnesses to their conspiracy. Maya grabbed the USB drive and Agent Rodriguez's service weapon, her hands slick with her protector's blood as she realized she was once again completely alone against forces that killed federal agents as casually as they murdered children's fathers. The woman who had spent 5 years keeping her safe was dying in front of her, and Maya Washington was about to discover just how far a 12-year-old girl could run when the alternative was joining her father in an early grave. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 7. Maya pressed herself against the cold concrete wall of the parking garage 3 blocks from Wayne State University, Agent Rodriguez's service weapon heavy in her trembling hands. The Glock 22 was designed for adult hands, and Maya had to grip it with both her small palms just to keep it steady. She'd never held a gun before, had never imagined that survival would require her to consider using one, but the weight of it provided a strange comfort. Proof that she wasn't completely defenseless against the forces hunting her. The parking garage was nearly empty at mid-morning, offering temporary sanctuary while Maya tried to process the devastating loss of her protector and plan her next move. Agent Rodriguez's blood still stained her clothes, and the image of her mentor collapsing behind that desk played on endless loop in Maya's mind. The one adult who had truly understood her situation, who had believed in her capabilities while working to keep her safe, was gone. Another casualty in Blackstone's war against anyone who threatened his empire. Maya pulled the USB drive from her pocket and stared at the innocuous device that had already cost so much blood. Her father's final gift contained evidence that could bring down a criminal conspiracy spanning more than a decade, but accessing that evidence had put everyone she loved in mortal danger. Grandma Rose lay poisoned in a hospital bed. Agent Rodriguez was dead. And Maya was alone with knowledge that powerful people would kill to suppress. She needed somewhere safe to examine the drive's contents, somewhere Blackstone's surveillance network couldn't reach her. The Detroit Public Library's main branch was only 8 blocks away, a fortress of knowledge with multiple entrances, security cameras that might discourage violence, and public computer terminals where she could access her father's files without leaving a digital trail on personal devices. Maya tucked the weapon into her backpack, covering it with Agent Rodriguez's jacket that she'd grabbed during her escape. The jacket was too large for her small frame, but it helped disguise her blood-stained clothes and provided psychological armor against the world that seemed determined to destroy her. The walk to the library took 20 minutes of careful navigation through crowds and side streets, Maya's eyes constantly scanning for the professional watchers who had been tracking her movements for days. Every businessman in a dark suit triggered a spike of paranoia. Every parked car with tinted windows seemed to hide potential threats, but Maya forced herself to move with the confident stride of someone who belonged rather than the hunted desperation she felt. The Detroit Public Library's main branch was a monument to civic optimism from an earlier era, its classical columns and marble facade suggesting a time when the city had believed in the transformative power of knowledge and education. Maya climbed the broad steps with relief, passing through doors that offered sanctuary for anyone seeking information rather than violence. The computer terminals on the third floor were mostly empty, occupied only by a few homeless individuals checking email and students working on research projects. Maya chose a station in the corner that offered views of both the main entrance and the emergency exits, positioned so she could monitor approaches while maintaining the appearance of a normal library patron. Her hands shook as she inserted the USB drive into the computer's port. A dialog box appeared requesting a password, and Maya felt her heart sink. Of course her father would have protected such sensitive information. She stared at the cursor blinking in the password field, trying to think like Marcus Washington, trying to understand what combination of letters and numbers he might have chosen to protect his final legacy. She tried her birthday first, 07151, but the system rejected it. Her mother's birthday produced the same result. Their old address, their phone number, even the date of her parents' wedding anniversary all failed to unlock the files. Maya sat back in the uncomfortable plastic chair, tears of frustration burning her eyes. She'd risked everything to recover this evidence, had watched people die to protect it, and now she couldn't access the very information that might bring their killers to justice. Then she remembered her father's last words to her, the promise he'd made while tucking her into bed for the final time: "Smart little girls can change the world." With trembling fingers, Maya typed, "Smart little girls." The system accepted the password immediately. The USB drive contained dozens of files, spreadsheets documenting pension fund transfers, email chains revealing coordination between shell companies, and financial records that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic theft spanning more than a decade. But it was the video file labeled, "For My Princess," that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. She double-clicked the file with hands that shook so badly she nearly missed the target. Her father's face filled the screen, and Maya had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Marcus Washington looked older than she remembered, worn down by stress and the weight of dangerous knowledge, but his eyes held the same gentle intelligence that had made her feel safe and loved during the first 7 years of her life. "Hello, baby girl," he said, his voice carrying across 5 years with devastating clarity. "If you're watching this, then I'm probably gone, and you've grown into the brilliant young woman I always knew you would become." Maya pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to her father speak from beyond the grave. "I need you to understand something important, Maya. I knew when I started this investigation that it might cost me my life. Richard Blackstone isn't just a criminal, he's a predator who destroys anyone who threatens his empire. But I couldn't stand by and watch him steal the retirement savings of working families, couldn't let him profit from the suffering of good people who had done nothing wrong except trust their employers to honor their commitments." Marcus Washington leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense with parental love and desperate urgency. "By the time you see this, you'll have discovered most of what I found. The pension fund theft, the shell companies, the systematic destruction of anyone who got too close to the truth. But there's one more piece of evidence, something I pray you'll never need to use, but that might be the only way to stop him if everything else fails." Maya leaned forward, her entire world focused on her father's words. "In our old house, in the basement workshop, there's a loose brick in the wall behind my workbench. 3rd row from the floor, 7th brick from the left corner. Inside that space, you'll find a digital recorder. On that device is a recording of Richard Blackstone personally ordering my death." Maya's blood went cold. A recording of Blackstone ordering her father's assassination would be evidence that even his armies of lawyers couldn't explain away. But her childhood home had been destroyed just hours earlier, consumed in the explosion that had nearly killed her. Her father continued, unaware of the cruel irony his words would carry 5 years later. I planted that recorder in Blackstone's office during my final meeting with him, when he tried to buy my silence with threats and bribes. He thought he was simply intimidating another accountant who had stumbled onto information he shouldn't have seen. But I was wearing a wire, baby girl, and every word of his confession is preserved on that device. Marcus Washington's expression grew even more serious, his voice taking on the weight of prophecy. Maya, if you're hearing this, then the FBI operation has probably failed, and you're in terrible danger. Using this recording will destroy Blackstone, but it will also destroy any chance you have of living a normal life. The moment you come forward with this evidence, you'll become the most protected and most isolated person in America. Witness protection, new identity, separation from everyone and everything you've ever known. Maya sobbed quietly as she watched her father struggle with the impossible burden he was placing on his child's shoulders. I'm asking you to make a choice that no little girl should ever have to make. You can walk away, try to build a new life somewhere safe, let Blackstone's crimes remain hidden. No one would blame you for choosing to protect yourself rather than seeking justice for people you've never met. He paused, wiping tears from his own eyes before continuing. But if you choose to fight, if you decide that stopping a monster is worth sacrificing your own future, then you need to know that I'm proud of you beyond words. You're the bravest, smartest, most determined person I've ever known, and if anyone can finish what I started, it's my brilliant little princess. The video ended with Marcus Washington reaching toward the camera, his hands seeming to touch Maya's face across the years that separated them. Maya sat in stunned silence, processing the full weight of what her father had revealed. The recording that could prove Blackstone's guilt was gone, destroyed along with everything else in their family home. But more importantly, she now understood the true cost of the path she'd chosen. Fighting Blackstone meant sacrificing her future, accepting a life of perpetual hiding and isolation. It meant never seeing Grandma Rose again except under federal supervision, never making real friends, never living openly as Maya Washington. The girl she'd been would have to die so that justice could live. But it also meant that the families whose pension funds had been stolen might get their money back. It meant that other potential whistleblowers wouldn't meet the same fate as her father. It meant that sometimes, when the world seemed determined to reward evil and punish good, someone had to stand up and say, no more. Maya carefully removed the USB drive and tucked it back into her pocket. She deleted the browser history, wiped down the keyboard and mouse, and gathered her belongings with the methodical precision of someone preparing for war. Agent Rodriguez had mentioned Agent Martinez before she died, the same Agent Martinez who was supposed to meet with her father 5 years ago. Maya had no way to contact him, no way to know if he was still alive or if Blackstone's corruption had compromised the entire federal investigation. Which meant she would have to confront Blackstone directly. The plan that formed in Maya's mind was so audacious, so impossible, that it just might work. Blackstone expected her to run, to hide, to behave like a frightened child seeking adult protection. He would never expect a 12-year-old girl to walk into his office and challenge him face to face. Maya left the library and hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of Blackstone Industries' downtown headquarters. As the city passed by her window, she thought about the choice her father had asked her to make. She could try to disappear, assume a new identity, live quietly somewhere far from Detroit and Harvard and all the places that held memories of better times. She could let Blackstone win, let him continue stealing from working families while building his empire on foundations of theft and murder. Or she could do what her father had trained her to do from the moment she could talk, ask the right questions, seek the truth no matter how dangerous it might be, and never stop believing that smart little girls could change the world. The taxi pulled up in front of Blackstone Industries' gleaming headquarters, a tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the sky with arrogant ambition. Maya paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the monument to corporate power that housed the man who had destroyed her family. She was a 12-year-old girl with a USB drive full of evidence, a federal agent's weapon, and a plan that would either bring down a criminal empire or get her killed in the next hour. Maya Washington adjusted her father's baseball cap, checked that the USB drive was secure in her pocket, and walked through the revolving doors into Richard Blackstone's domain, ready to finish what Marcus Washington had started 5 years earlier. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 8. The 42nd floor of Blackstone Industries headquarters existed in a realm of understated power that spoke volumes about the man who ruled from its apex. Maya Washington rode the executive elevator upward through layers of corporate hierarchy, each floor representing millions of dollars in revenue built on the broken dreams of working families whose retirement savings had been systematically stolen. She stood alone in the mirrored elevator car, a 12-year-old girl in borrowed clothes carrying evidence that could topple an empire. Her father's baseball cap sat low over her eyes, and Agent Rodriguez's jacket hung loose around her small frame, making her look even younger and more vulnerable than her years. But beneath the childish exterior, Maya carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had chosen justice over safety, truth over survival. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the executive floor, and Maya stepped into a reception area that screamed wealth and intimidation in equal measure. Italian marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Original artwork lined walls paneled in rare woods, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of Detroit's skyline, a city Blackstone had helped hollow out through decades of predatory business practices. Behind an imposing desk sat Richard Blackstone's executive assistant, a severe woman in her 50s whose disapproving expression suggested she viewed Maya's presence as a regrettable mistake that would soon be corrected. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackstone," Maya announced, her child's voice carrying clearly through the opulent space. The assistant looked up from her computer with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Blackstone doesn't take appointments with children. Perhaps your parents could schedule." "Tell him Maya Washington is here to discuss her father's work," Maya interrupted, pulling the USB drive from her pocket and placing it on the marble reception desk. "Tell him I have something that belongs to him." The assistant's expression shifted from annoyance to sharp attention as she recognized the significance of the name. Within moments, she was speaking in hushed tones into her phone, glancing nervously at Maya as she conveyed the message to her employer. "Mr. Blackstone will see you now," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Through the double doors, straight ahead." Maya pocketed the USB drive and walked toward Blackstone's private office, her sneakers silent on the marble floor. As she approached the massive doors, she touched the small device Agent Rodriguez had given her during one of their early meetings, a pin-sized camera disguised as a button on the jacket she wore. At the time, the FBI agent had claimed it was just a precaution, but Maya now understood it had been preparation for exactly this moment. The camera was already transmitting, broadcasting live to news stations worldwide through connections Agent Rodriguez had established before her death. Whatever happened in the next hour, the world would witness every word, every threat, every revelation that passed between a 12-year-old girl and one of America's most powerful men. Maya pushed through the doors into Richard Blackstone's inner sanctum. The office was a monument to ego and power, larger than most people's homes and decorated with the spoils of a lifetime spent conquering weaker opponents. Blackstone sat behind a desk the size of a small car, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Maya with the predatory intensity of a shark that had detected blood in the water. But for the first time since their confrontation at Harvard, Maya wasn't afraid of him. She had chosen this path knowing it might lead to her death, and that acceptance had freed her from the paralyzing terror that had dominated her life for the past week. "Miss Maya Washington," Blackstone said, his voice carrying that familiar silk-over-steel quality. "You've been quite difficult to locate. My associates have been looking everywhere for you." "I know," Maya replied simply, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "I saw them destroy my house. I watched them murder Agent Rodriguez." Blackstone's expression didn't change, but Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested surprise at her directness. "Such serious accusations from such a young person," he said smoothly. "I'm afraid you've been listening to too many conspiracy theories, my dear. Agent Rodriguez died in an unfortunate accident. Wrong place, wrong time, caught in crossfire between competing criminal elements." Maya pulled out the USB drive and placed it on Blackstone's pristine desk. "My father left me a message, Mr. Blackstone. He told me about the recording he made during your final meeting, the one where you personally ordered his assassination." For the first time in their interactions, Richard Blackstone's composure cracked. His eyes fixed on the USB drive with laser intensity, and Maya could see the calculations running behind his gaze. How much she knew, how much she could prove, how much damage she could inflict before his security team eliminated the threat she represented. Your father was a troubled man who made poor choices, Blackstone said carefully. Whatever you think you found, whatever stories you've been told, the reality is that Marcus Washington died in a tragic accident that had nothing to do with his employment at my company. Maya smiled, an expression that would have seemed innocent on any other 12-year-old but carried disturbing wisdom on her young face. I'd like to ask you a question, Mr. Blackstone. The same question you asked me at Harvard. She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the city where her father had lived and died, where her grandmother had worked herself to exhaustion trying to support a family destroyed by corporate greed. You presented a theoretical scenario about acquiring a company's assets while minimizing costs and legal exposure. You described 7 layers of financial manipulation designed to circumvent federal oversight. Do you remember? Blackstone's voice was carefully controlled. I remember an academic exercise designed to challenge advanced students. Maya turned back to face him, and in her expression was something that made the billionaire's blood run cold. It was her father's determination combined with her grandmother's unbreakable spirit, concentrated into the small frame of a child who had seen too much and lost too much to be intimidated by wealth and power. It wasn't theoretical, was it, Mr. Blackstone? It was the exact methodology you used to destroy Washington manufacturing. The exact steps you followed to steal 17 companies' pension funds over the past decade. The exact process you're using right now to acquire Detroit municipal assets while leaving the city's workers with nothing but broken promises. Maya pulled a folded paper from her pocket, one of the documents she'd photographed in her father's hidden safe. Layer 1, establish shell companies in multiple states to obscure common ownership. Shell companies like Morrison Holdings, Detroit Investment Partners, and Great Lakes Financial Services, all of which trace back to Blackstone Industries through a web of offshore accounts and nominee directors. Blackstone's face had gone white, but Maya continued relentlessly. Layer 2, cultivate relationships with regulatory officials through strategic campaign contributions and promises of lucrative post-government employment. Officials like Commissioner Bradley, who approved the Morrison Steel acquisition despite obvious irregularities, and who now works as a consultant for your development projects. Layer 3, coordinate pressure on target company supply chains through a network of shell companies offering below-market contracts designed to disrupt rather than profit. Maya's voice grew stronger with each revelation, the weight of 5 years' investigation flowing through her words like water breaking through a dam. Layer 4, customer-based disruption through predatory pricing subsidized by stolen pension funds. Layer 5, personnel management through intimidation, bribery, and when necessary, elimination of key employees who pose threats to the operation. She moved closer to Blackstone's desk, her small form somehow dominating the enormous office through sheer force of moral authority. Layer 6, environmental and safety challenges manufactured through regulatory capture and strategic complaint filing. And Layer 7. Maya's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The elimination of leadership that refuses to surrender. Maya placed her small hands on Blackstone's desk and leaned forward, her 12-year-old eyes holding his gaze with unflinching determination. My father developed this framework, Mr. Blackstone. Not to facilitate corporate theft, but to expose it. Every layer he described was based on your actual methods, documented through months of investigation and recorded during his final meeting with you. Blackstone's mask of civility finally fell away completely, revealing the predator beneath the polished exterior. You have no idea what you're dealing with, little girl, he snarled, reaching for his phone. Whatever you think you know, whatever pathetic evidence you believe you possess, it ends here. Security will escort you to a quiet place where... Where what? Maya interrupted, pulling Agent Rodriguez's jacket open to reveal the small camera pinned to her shirt. Where you'll murder a 12-year-old girl on live television being broadcast to news stations worldwide? Blackstone's hand froze over his phone as the implications crashed over him. You're bluffing. Maya smiled with the serene confidence of someone who had accepted the consequences of their choices. Channel 7 News, CNN, Fox Business, BBC World Service, and about 40 other outlets are currently watching this conversation through a camera system Agent Rodriguez activated before her death. Every word you've spoken, every threat you've made, every admission you've accidentally given, It's all being recorded for posterity. The color drained from Blackstone's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered by a child barely half his height. You see, Mr. Blackstone, my father taught me something important. He said that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't violence or money or political influence. Sometimes it's just asking the right questions in front of the right audience. Maya moved back to the window, her silhouette framed against the city her father had died trying to protect. I asked you the same question you asked me at Harvard. But unlike you, I provided the correct answer. Not a theoretical framework for corporate theft, but a documented case study of actual crimes you've committed against working families for more than a decade. The sound of sirens began to filter through the office's thick windows, distant at first, but growing rapidly closer. The USB drive contains my father's complete investigation, Maya continued conversationally. Financial records, email chains, documented evidence of pension fund theft totaling more than $800 million. The FBI will find it very interesting reading. Blackstone lunged for his desk drawer, probably reaching for a weapon, but Maya was no longer afraid. She had accomplished what she'd come to do. The truth was out, broadcast live to the world, documented and preserved for the justice system to process. The office doors burst open as federal agents swarmed into the room, weapons drawn and orders shouted. Agent Martinez, the same Agent Martinez who was supposed to meet with her father 5 years earlier, led the team with the grim satisfaction of someone finally settling a long overdue debt. Richard Blackstone, Agent Martinez announced formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and multiple counts of murder in the first degree. As they cuffed the man who had destroyed her family, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years, peace. The weight she'd carried since her father's death finally lifted from her small shoulders, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of promises kept and justice served. But it was Agent Martinez's next words that made her smile for the first time since Grandma Rose had collapsed in their kitchen. Miss Washington, I have some good news. Your grandmother is awake and asking for you. 3 months later. Maya Washington sat in the sunny garden behind Detroit General Hospital's rehabilitation wing, watching Grandma Rose work with her physical therapist to regain strength stolen by Blackstone's poison. The doctors had said it would take time, but Rose Washington possessed the same stubborn determination that had carried her family through 5 years of hardship and loss. Baby girl, stop looking so serious, Rose said, settling into the chair beside Maya with only the slightest tremor in her hands. You've got your whole life ahead of you now. Time to be a child again. Maya smiled, closing the college brochure she'd been reading. Harvard had not only welcomed her back but had established the Marcus Washington Memorial Scholarship for gifted students from disadvantaged backgrounds. MIT and Stanford had also sent recruitment letters, as had every major university in the country. But Maya had made a different choice. I've decided to stay in Detroit for high school, she announced. I want to be close to you, and I want to help rebuild what Blackstone destroyed. Rose raised an eyebrow. And how exactly does a 12-year-old girl plan to rebuild a city? Maya pulled out a legal document bearing the seal of the federal court system. The Marcus and Maya Washington Foundation for Economic Justice. Funded by the seizure and liquidation of Blackstone Industries' assets, dedicated to helping families recover from corporate theft and ensuring that whistleblowers have the protection they need to come forward. She looked up at her grandmother with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years but also, finally, the spark of childhood joy that had been missing for too long. $800 million, Grandma. That's how much they stole from working families over the past decade. The foundation will return every penny to the people it was taken from, plus interest. And there's enough left over to fund investigations into other companies using similar tactics. Rose Washington stared at the document, then at her granddaughter, then back at the document. Maya, honey, do you understand what this means? It means no more cleaning office buildings until your hands hurt. It means children whose parents get fired for asking uncomfortable questions will have someone to help them. It means my daddy's death actually changed something. Maya stood and moved to the garden's edge, where she could see the Detroit skyline in the distance. The city looked different now, not yet healed, but healing. Hope had returned to neighborhoods that had forgotten what it felt like to believe in the future. And it means, Maya added quietly, that sometimes the smallest voice really can topple the mightiest empire, if it's brave enough to speak the truth. Behind her, Rose Washington wiped tears from her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the brilliant, courageous granddaughter who had honored her father's memory by proving that smart little girls really could change the world. In the distance, construction crews worked on new housing projects funded by the foundation. Former Blackstone employees testified before Congress about corporate reform legislation. And in a federal prison in Michigan, Richard Blackstone served the first day of a life sentence, brought down by a 12-year-old girl who had refused to let his crimes remain hidden in the shadows. Maya Washington had lost her childhood to the pursuit of justice. But she had gained something even more valuable, the knowledge that courage and truth, no matter how small their source, could triumph over wealth and power when guided by love and an unshakable belief in doing what's right. Her father would have been proud.